Hello, and welcome to today's special webinar event, Rubrik Product Deep Dive, Local and Remote Disaster Recovery Orchestration with AppFlows. Today's webinar is sponsored by Rubrik and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator for this special event. Now, before we get to today's great content, there are a few things you should know about this webinar. First off, we want this to be a very educational event for you, so we encourage any and all questions in the questions box in our webinar control panel. Not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we will discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you ask. Second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources, including information about getting started with Rubrik, information on our Guerrilla Guide book club, and a link to the Actual Tech Media Event Center. So I encourage you to check out those resources in the handout section and share them with your friends and colleagues. Third, at the end of this webinar event, we'll be awarding a $300 Amazon gift card to one lucky attendee in the live event. If you're watching this webinar on demand, I'm sorry, the drawing's already occurred. But if you do win, you can choose to donate the value of that gift card to one of our selected charities. Thanks to generous prize winners on previous Actual Tech Media events, thousands of dollars have been donated to charity. So thank you in advance if you make that choice today. The official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found at actualtechmedia.com. Scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. And finally, one of the best benefits of this event is the opportunity to ask a question of our expert presenters. So to help encourage you to pose that pressing question, we have a special additional prize for you. That's another Amazon gift card, this one for $50, for the best question. At the end of the event, we'll look at all the questions, pick out the very best one, and contact that prize winner. And now, let's get to today's fantastic content. It's my pleasure to introduce you to our speaker today, Joe Harlan. He's GTM Tech Lead for AppFlows at Rubrik. Joe, welcome to the presentation. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Hello, everyone.
Well,
appreciate everyone joining the call.
Yeah, so go ahead, take it away.
Oh, awesome. All right, thank you. Well, cool. All right, let me dive right in. All right, so we're here to talk about AppFlows, our orchestrated disaster recovery product. So now you're probably asking yourself, you know, what's a backup company doing getting involved with DR? Well, as a backup company who's been in the business now for quite a while with over 3,500 customers, we've really gotten great at backups. And what we're really trying to do as a company is bring more value to something that's, you know, pretty mundane and kind of day to day, right? So data protection is not terribly exciting most of the time. So what can we do in terms of deriving more value out of these backup copies of the data that we're keeping? And rather than having them be a burden, have them provide additional business value to us. So if we look at what we've done with our SaaS platform, Polaris, where we aggregate all of the metadata from all of the data protection activities that are carried out by the Rubrik appliances, backing up your data sets in your data centers and in the cloud, we've started to add on new capabilities. So we have our ransomware recovery and remediation platform or capability called Radar that's available on the platform today, as well as a data governance solution where you can use the tool to find that sensitive data set that you have out there and see who has access to it. And that's basically the same way that we're introducing our disaster recovery product, is we're bringing it to the SaaS platform and taking advantage of all of the actions that we're taking in terms of data protection here in the data center, and then orchestrating those data copies to online them in the event of a disaster. All right. So really, first things first, the real big key here is to automate, right? These activities for disaster recovery can be, you know, often hair-raising events that lead us to, you know, moving this way. So we don't really want to spend the time it takes to manually try to tackle these recoveries. So having the capability to automate these recoveries in the moments where they're more meaningful to the business is really critical. So this product will bring to the table the ability for both failover as well as failback, including the ability to recover from those backups that you have available to you in the local site. So we'll talk a little bit later about those local site recoveries and how those can be used to assist you in the recovery from ransomware. All right. And it would not go without saying here that we need this to be a cost-effective capability. And so through our Rubrik Go subscription service, we have 3 flexible ways to license the product. We include AppFlows in our Enterprise Edition bundle, which includes both Radar, Sonar, and AppFlows, and really gives you the full cyber resiliency story of our platform. Additionally, you can buy AppFlows a la carte, and you license it per cluster in the primary site, and that'll be based on the capacity of your cluster and how it's deployed. Or alternatively, if your cluster is protecting data sets that necessarily AppFlows doesn't really support, and it wouldn't make a lot of sense to license the entirety of the cluster, we also have options for licensing on a per VM basis in packs of 10. So very flexible licensing options there for you. And lastly, we really want this to be integral to the way that you manage Rubrik today, or would manage Rubrik if you purchased it as a new customer, and keep it simple. Really, one of the huge tenets of Rubrik is that we do things in a very simple way. So we tackle some of the bigger data protection challenges and data security challenges with, with ease and simplicity. So the single control plane of Polaris brings to the table a lot of this functionality and makes it very, very easy to manage. All right, let's talk a little bit about how this product is going to work. So you may have heard terms and concepts in the industry around DR products, such as Runbook or Virtual Protection Group. What we call ours is a blueprint or application blueprint. The idea being that you'll tell us what VMs and in what order the VMs need to boot, and what compute storage and networking you'd like to use in the DR site, and we'll handle the rest. And really, we want these blueprints to be analogous to a single business service or application stack, not some monolithic structure that you're just defining so that the failover concept is that much easier and all at once and in the order that you define. And the reason for that is these blueprint objects are really going to be first-class citizens within the Rubrik platform. So as you navigate around the other aspects of the product for things like the ransomware remediation or the data classification capabilities, these blueprint objects will show up and give the observer the ability to see in the context of a business service rather than some monolithic structure or something mostly meaningless to the business. So really critical here that we look at them in that way. All right, let's talk a little bit about how we handle recovery time objective. So out of the box, what we're doing is we're taking advantage of the data protection activities that are part of the Rubrik platform. And that's an SLA-driven approach. And what we mean by that is you define your requirements for backups, how frequently you'd like to back up, how long you'd like to keep those backups, to where you may like to replicate or archive those backups. And you apply that SLA policy broadly or tactically to the objects that you need to protect in that manner. And you can create as many of those as you like in your platform. And it's those backup policies that we use, those SLAs, that dictate the data sets that we'll have available to us in the DR site. So as those SLAs are backing up with an incremental forever approach, so the first full snapshot and then incremental forever thereafter, and then replicating those off to the DR site, we're able to take advantage of those copies in one of two ways, depending on how you'd like to configure your blueprint. And we call that an RTO optimization. And those two options go as thus. We have the option to minimize data store usage, where we keep the data in the Rubrik cluster in the DR site until you call for it, until you say, I want to run a test failover or a real failover job. And then at that point, we copy the data into the data stores defined by the blueprint. Now, that's going to give you a decent RTO, but it's going to include the time it takes to copy that data from the Rubrik cluster into the vSphere data store. So what we'd like to do is go ahead and speed that up some by pilot lighting that experience. So we also have an RTO optimization called reduce recovery time. And what that's going to do is after you define that blueprint and a little bit of time has passed, right away it'll start to seed a full-size copy of each VM within the blueprint into the data store. And then as new replicated snapshots arrive in the DR site, play those images forward. So they're always at the ready with the latest recovery point in time, eliminating the time it takes to copy that data and giving you a much faster time to recovery. All right. Now let's talk RPO, so recovery point objective. So again, we're using those SLAs that you've defined for your virtual machine objects, and we're protecting them under those policies. So however frequently those snapshots occur, that's the frequency of the snapshots being replicated to the DR site. So if it's every 4 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours, or a day, you'll have those recovery points available to you. And then those recovery points are maintained on that Rubrik cluster per the settings that you apply there. So additionally, we are also integrating our continuous data protection CDP capabilities with AppFlows. So if you do want to enable CDP on a set of your SLAs for those data sets that are most critical to the business, and you want to reduce that RPO down to a 60-second level, then you can do so, and AppFlows will be able to use those data sets for those recoveries. So we are able to do the DR recoveries both in the local site as well as the remote site from those CDP journals. And we can keep those up to 24 hours. And CDP is now included in the AppFlows license. So you will now have an unlimited use license for the CDP capability on the Rubrik platform. So pretty exciting there. All right. So 2 clicks to a failover and failback, real simple here. I'm going to show you this in a test failover here during the demo. Very basic. Once you fail over and you're up and running, one of the components of these blueprints is actually a post failover SLA assignment. And what that's going to do is ensure that, hey, we're running the business still. We're just doing it in a different location. That doesn't mean I get to concede my backups. I still have to take those backups. I still have to protect the data that the business is generating. So that post failover SLA assignment is going to automatically pick up where it left off and continue that incremental forever chain. There's no requirement for a net new full backup when those VMs are instantiated in the DR site. We have a technology that we've put into the platform that we refer to as VM linking, where we know all we need to know about the VM object running in the primary site. And since we've replicated the first full and incrementals thereafter over to the DR site, we have everything we need there in the DR site. So when we instantiate that virtual machine there, we just link that object to the original that came from the primary site and continue that snapshot chain forever. And the same story goes for failback. In fact, that SLA assignment that you pick up in the DR site, if you set it for replication back to the primary, assuming that the outage that you experienced in the primary site was some sort of transient in nature outage, maybe a power problem that was going to last several days due to a weather event, something to that effect, hopefully less severe than complete and total destruction of that site, then the SLA can replicate back any new backups that you capture there as well. So that when you do go to failback, you still have a pair of copies of the data in both locations. Or it could replicate off to a tertiary site, protecting you from subsequent site failure if there is concern for that activity coming to bear, unfortunately, as well in the DR site. All right, and lastly, DR test is probably the more frequent use of these products. Thankfully, I've lived through a DR in my life, in my past life, when I was on the customer side. It's definitely not a fun event. DR testing is probably not that fun either, but having these reports and being able to confidently show that the business is ready to recover from one of these disasters, and being able to hand those off to auditors or leadership, it's a big deal. So that the compliance reports are a key part of this product, and I'll point those out as we get to the demo where those can be downloaded. All right, let's talk a little bit about the big unfortunate elephant in the room, though. So yeah, nowadays ransomware is one of the larger concerns, and I think our customer Sean here said it best. He says, "Look, I'm more concerned with ransomware 10 times than I am a natural disaster. Those things come very very often, infrequent, but these ransomware attacks, they're heating up more and more. So we really wanted to do something about this in terms of easing the burden of the recovery process. So let's talk a little bit about what those recoveries tend to look like, and then we'll talk a little bit about how they might go without automation. So first, in a ransomware scenario, you have a series of questions that really need to be answered in order for the business to return to service. And the first is, what got hit? Yeah, you might log into a couple of systems and see the ransom note and understand on those boxes, that they've been impacted. But really, it's going to come down to what services in the environment are impacted, and how important is it for me to get which ones back online and in which order. So, which recovery points in time do I use? How do I know when the attack occurred versus when my last good backup of the data was? And how am I going to leverage that backup and get my systems back online and running in the right order such that we can return the entirety of the business back to service? Now let's talk about how that might go down without automation. I mentioned it earlier, right? We have to identify all these offline services. Maybe we have an operational dashboard that can tell us, we're no longer taking user connections to these business services. Maybe we don't. Maybe we have to go out and start to touch each and every system. That's a very time-consuming affair and can get pretty hair-raising when standing in the war room with a team of business leaders and IT operations staff. It's definitely incumbent that we find the breadth of the impact and we triage what's been impacted so that we can understand the order that we need to recover. So without some form of tool or another to tell me where I've been hit with some level or degree of confidence, that exercise becomes very, very challenging and very time consuming. And at this point, with the outage going on, time is money. So the longer it takes for us to do this, the more money the business begins to hemorrhage. Secondarily, to what point in time do I recover? Well, without a tool to tell me, hey, here's when your data was good, and then oh, we detected this encryption event. There's really no easy way to do this. So it's going to come down to unfortunate guesswork in some cases, or the business conceding to what is an acceptable amount of data loss and how far back do we think we need to go. Oftentimes, you'll see businesses take broad stroke attempts at this if they're not able to rapidly and forensically determine when that attack and encryption event occurred and how to go back and where to go back. All right. Lastly, how do I recover? And this is an ugly one, unfortunately. Rubrik is a zero trust data platform. We have an immutable append only file system. We have a logical air gap and several additional features that enhance the security of the platform to ensure that your data is safe, like it's away in a gold locker, and that if you need it, it'll be there for the recovery. If you don't have Rubrik and you have another solution, maybe one of the solutions from a legacy provider that does not offer those capabilities, oftentimes these attackers go straight for your backups. They immediately move to delete them or destroy them in some way and make them removed from the table in terms of your recovery options. And at that point, unfortunately for some folks, it turns out that paying the ransom might be the only way to get the data back. But I'm happy to report we have over 200 Rubrik customers today that have been struck by ransomware. And for the data sets that they protected with Rubrik, they were able to successfully recover. You can even check out our website. We have a case study out there from Lang's Building Supply, and they were hit in the recent past and able to recover in their scenario. And you can see the details about that event there. All right. So really what we've done here is we've taken that ransomware recovery capability that we call Radar, that's part of the Polaris platform, and we've combined that with the power and automation and orchestration capabilities of AppFlows and enabled you to see these blueprint objects in relation to the attacks on the individual virtual machines that you've added to those constructs. So as you can see here in the animation, those blueprint objects being expanded to see the VMs, some of those objects have been hit, some of those objects have not been hit. And it makes it very, very quick to handle that first question. What's the blast radius? Where was I struck? So in this case, this gives you the rapid answer for that. Secondarily, in the radar anomalies page, when we see these blueprints and their associated VMs that have been struck by this unfortunate encryption event, we're able to select them for bulk recovery, either by individual VMs or for an AppFlows orchestrated recovery in place in the local site, right? Because these attackers, they've crushed your data, they've destroyed your data. They haven't killed your servers or your switches or the racks and the power in your data center. All of the gear is still there. It's the data that's been compromised. So in order to bring the business up more quickly, we're enabling the capability to just rewind those VMs in place by powering them down and taking that point in time snapshot that Radar identifies right prior to the attack and gives that off to AppFlows and tells it, here's what you need to use for the recovery because this has the last known good copy of your data. And then just write the delta between the current point in time with the encrypted data and the previous point in time with the good set of data. So the recovery becomes very, very quick and the business returns the service as soon as possible. All right. Yep, there we go. All right. So in brief summary, we're introducing full disaster recovery capabilities for VMware vSphere environments, both on-prem and vSphere environments in the cloud. We'll be introducing support for VMware Cloud on AWS and Azure VMware Service in the November timeframe, coinciding with the release of our CDM 602 software that's part of our Rubrik cluster appliances. Right, so these blueprints are able to orchestrate the recovery, including the dependencies for boot order, the ability to execute postscripts, configure the network, and even for testing, go ahead and configure them to go into an isolated network. So these capabilities are all included in the product today. So that ability to test for that failover and have a second copy of that running production application up in a safe test bubble while you're still operating the one in the primary site is absolutely part of the product. All right, let me go ahead and switch gears here, and I'm going to share my screen. And let's see, we will get into the demo portion. All right, Scott, if you let me know when my screen is visible, I'll go ahead and continue.
Joe, I can see it. Looks good.
Awesome. Okay. So awesome. I usually like to bring up this drawing just to kind of put all of the words I use to describe the product into more of a single holistic picture, showing all of the moving parts, right? So we have the Polaris SaaS platform. This is where the AppFlows and radar and sonar capabilities are deployed. And these are the Rubrik clusters in your data centers. The SLA assignments on a per VM basis dictate how often we back up those VM objects and to where we replicate them here in the secondary location. And then we can see these two orange arrows, one depicted as on-demand export, and that's going to be analogous to that RTO optimization that I referred to as minimized data store usage, where as the backups are replicated to the VR site, we keep them here. We don't put them into the vSphere cluster just yet, not until we launch a job, not until we kick off a real or a test failover event. And this could be advantageous for those customers who have vSphere real estate in their secondary location that may be being used for other things like dev test or sandbox environments. And the purpose there would be we'll shoot that environment in the head and get rid of those workloads, and we'll take on the production workloads coming from the opposite site in the event of a disaster. And so that gives you the opportunity to enjoy that iron rather than just having it sit there and sucking all the cold air in the room out. Secondarily, incremental export is the technique we use to create those latest point in time copies and keep them up to date as new replicated snapshots are arriving in the DR site. So what I'll do in my demo is I'm actually going to launch a pair of blueprints in a test failover event using each of these two techniques. So the first one I launch with the RTO optimization of minimized data store usage is actually a WordPress application. Nothing too terribly exciting, but it's a two-tier app, something to look at. A couple of Linux VMs, about 2.5 to 3 gigabytes in size. So as you can imagine, the copy time it takes for those to move over, we can enjoy stomaching here during this demo period. Now, the other 3 VMs that I have in the additional blueprint here that we're going to fail over, they're much, much larger. They're about 3/4 of a terabyte in size, grand total. And as you could probably imagine, if we sat and tried to wait for those to fail over, you guys would get bored real quick, and so would I. So instead, these are set for that minimized recovery time, and the data is already copied into the data store for us by virtue of that configuration. So we're not going to wait on that copy time. We're just going to experience the time it takes for the orchestration and the onlining of those VMs as part of the blueprint. And then once I've launched those, we'll kind of jump back out to the interface here in Polaris, and we'll take a look at the blueprint listing pages, and then we'll go through the process of creating a blueprint. So these Rubrik clusters in each site are connected to the vCenter instance managing these clusters, and they query them every 30 minutes for all the details necessary for us to carry out our duties for data protection. And they bubble that information in terms of the picture of the vSphere infrastructure up to Polaris. So when we go through this process of creating the blueprints, it's very point and click simple to direct all of the settings to point to real infrastructure that's there. We don't have to guess it or stick it in a spreadsheet and import it in any way. It's all very point and click, easy to go. And then once we're done creating the blueprint, by that time, these failover events are usually done, usually in less than 10 minutes. So what we'll do is we'll go out and we'll take a look at that WordPress app and see, has the PostScript handled the rehoming of this application from the subnet that it was in the primary site to its new subnet in the DR site? And we'll launch that page and check it out. And then when we're done, we'll go ahead and run the cleanup. So a long time ago, in a past life, essentially, when I was on the customer side, I used to work for an organization that would test quarterly DR for dozens of applications. The business probably had hundreds of them, so we would do many dozens every quarter. And that would amount to many hundred VMs. And unfortunately, we didn't have a tool at the time. And so a PM would hand you a spreadsheet and say, here, go clean up the mess that we made in those DR clusters and get those VMs deleted and removed. Man, I always felt like I was being handed a time bomb and an opportunity to make a terrible resume generating mistake. So to have the capability to go ahead and clean up one of these tests when we're done and have it programmatically remove all the resources that we've created in the DR site for us, pretty excellent feature in my mind. So, all right. Well, let's jump in and take a quick tour of the environment. So I'll start here with the DR vCenter environment. And right away, we can see all these VMs here that are powered off in my inventory and are prefixed with RBRK and an epic time sequence number at the end. So really, these VMs, these IE demo 01 through 03 VMs, these are our base images for that blueprint I'm going to fail over. And we can see the hard disk here, the secondary hard disk is the 250 gig disk that I've loaded with a bunch of data to kind of get that gravity and mass that is needed to demonstrate the missing copy time. But a couple other things to note about them. They don't have any network attached, and there's no memory allocated to these. And that's by design. We don't want someone to power these on because if they had network attached and they could possibly come online, they could create a split brain scenario with the application running on the primary site. We definitely don't want that. So when we do bring them up for the purpose of a test, we'll add network interfaces back to them and we'll assign them to that network that is an isolated segment so that they can come online safely and in private without interrupting the other environment. And we keep the memory deallocated here because we don't want you turning them on because the technique we use to roll these images forward requires these VMs to be offline. So if one of your operators does see one of these and is curious and tries to turn it on, it will wake up, it'll blink its eyes at them, and then it'll go right back to sleep because there's no memory. And that's just basically the behavior that we're looking for. So when we launch this test event, what's going to happen is we're actually going to create linked clones from these base images from a pin snapshot that we determine is the one we're going to use. So if you choose the latest recovery point in time, we've already got that snapshot pin there, so we'll hang on to that, and then we'll go ahead and create those linked clones. You may recall the linked clone technology from the introduction of virtual desktop infrastructure in VMware. This is the concept where we use one VM's VMDKs as the base image for a new virtual machine instance where we capture changes to that base image in a separate set of VMDKs. And this will allow us to have the test instantiation of these virtual machines and then safely discard those instantiations when we're done with the testing, leaving that base image that we're always keeping pre-staged here. Now, if I ran a real failover, we wouldn't do that link clone. We would just convert these images in place and fire them up as quickly as possible. So that event would go much faster than the link clone technique might. Now for the other two VMs, those WordPress VMs, and I'll point those out here in a minute in the primary site, we're going to create these base images and then create the link clones. But when we're done, the difference here is we've told the RTO optimization of that blueprint, we want to minimize our data store usage. So we're going to delete all of those when we go through the cleanup process. So at the very end of this demo, we'll see those disappear from the system. All right, taking a peek here at my primary vCenter. Again, we can see IE demo 1 through 3. These are the source VMs in the RTO optimized for reducing that recovery time blueprint. And then here's the WordPress application VMs, the database server and the app server. And we can quickly see, just by pasting into my browser here, we can see that the blog page, oh, you gotta be kidding me. So, all right, we're in a demo, Wild West, good times. I'm also connected to the, all right, could be something with the way I'm connected right now. All right, let's assume for the sake of demos that's actually working right now. Unfortunately, it looks like it's not, but okay. Oh, wait, I'm on the wrong VM, that's why. Forgive me, that didn't seem to refresh like it should have. There we are. So that should work this time, since I'm on the correct VM. And ta-da, there's my blog page. All right, hello AppFlows. So we know we have a functional WordPress application. So now let's go into the Polaris interface. And this is the dashboard landing page in GPS, one of the modules within Polaris. This is where you'll land as soon as you log in. Now I'm going to go to inventory, and I'm going to pick on the AppFlows card. And then I'm going to select those two blueprints that I'd like to fail over right away. So this list of blueprints here, and then I'll click on the ellipses and say test failover. Now right away, it's going to offer me the latest recovery point in time. If I wanted to, I could go ahead and select a different point in time by clicking the drop down and saying select. And I'll see what's available to me here right away from a timestamp perspective. What is the latest? These two are the latest. And I can see that the recovery types available to me based upon the unique SLA assignments of each VM, are different here. So this database server I'm actually protecting with CDP. And so I don't know what your wall clock time says, but that's, well, that's not roughly. Oh no, that is close. Okay, at any rate. So if I wanted to, I can click in here and then drag across the timeline. So right now it's aligned with my snapshot. I could go forward and pick one of the later points in time that's in my recovery journal. I could also use the calendar here and go back to another day where maybe I have another set of snapshots I'd like to use instead. For this demonstration, I'll just stick with the latest recovery point in time. I'm not going to get too carried away here. And then we'll go ahead and pick an error handler of abort and cleanup. So for the steps to reconfigure the network and to run the post scripts, if there's any sort of errors, the error handler selection here will kick in. So I've set abort and cleanup. So if I hit any problems, it's just going to stop the job, clean up any mess I may have made in vCenter, and back out. That allows me to go out and check the report, maybe go back later and figure out what's going on. If I wanted to, and I was going to iterate over this failover event, and maybe I was developing the post scripts I'm going to use to fail over these virtual machines to the opposite site, then pause is a great option. That'll just stop the job right in its tracks, allow me to go out as an operator, peek at the problem, maybe correct it, or come back and just cancel the job and clean it up. But if everything's fine and I'd like to just resume it, I can come back and take that option on as well. So I'm going to go ahead with abort and cleanup and just launch this job. And there we go. So those are on their way. Now I can click here to go to recoveries and I can go watch that unfold, but I don't think anybody wants to watch paint dry right now. So we'll come back to that in a moment and review those steps once they're complete and we've gone through this interface a little bit. So first things first, obviously the blueprint name. You can see we have a sundry of names here available. Source cluster and target cluster. These are the Rubrik clusters protecting the data for the VMs that we've added to the blueprints in each site. We can see how many VMs are in each. I have a modest demo environment. Truly, there is no limit. The team has tested up to 100 VMs in a single blueprint, although I would caution against making such a monolithic structure unless all 100 of those VMs truly are part of a single application environment. All right. Here we have an RPO lag column, and what this is meant to indicate, it's supposed to be a visual indicator for us to say, are we keeping up with backups in the primary site? And are we appropriately replicating those backups to the DR site? So if I hover over this low rating, the green rating here, I can see the backup frequency for each of the VMs within my blueprint. I can also see a rating on a local and a remote basis. So this is the local backups being kept up with, and this is the replication of those backups. And we quantify these ratings here in the tooltip and differentiate between both CDP and snapshots. So you can see here what a medium or a high rating might look like. And that's meant to be a visual cue to the operator to say, oh, maybe the backups are having issues keeping up with these virtual machines. I should probably go check on those maybe before I launch my next test, or maybe before we wind up finding ourselves in a disaster scenario and need to recover. So hopefully what you'll see here down the line, as we do here, is all those ratings should read low. Lastly, blueprint status column. This is where actions against the blueprints and their current statuses are typically reflected. I have just launched those tests, so it hasn't really updated the field, but I'll go ahead and refresh this page now, and we'll see that our tests are in progress on those too. The other things that you might see here is alarms as to the misalignment of your resource maps. Those are those maps that point to compute, storage, and networking in the DR site to use for these failovers. So if those get out of alignment, you'll see something here because we do query vCenter every 30 minutes from the Rubrik cluster to the vCenter perspective, and we share that with Polaris. And then Polaris queries these blueprints and reflects that against the reality of your infrastructure. If you've selected something like a data store that's no longer there because maybe last week we replaced the SAN, then you'll see one of these resource map errors here in the blueprint status column, giving you the cue that it's time to go edit those. But what's really nice about these constructs is, even if we get the resource map wrong, and for some reason we're pointing at a resource that's no longer there, it's not going to put the data at risk, our ability to have that data at the ready in the DR site, because these blueprints are not the engine that is replicating the data. Instead, that's the SLAs at the data center level that are assigned to each of those objects. The only influence these blueprints have on the data's recovery is how long it might take, that RTO optimization. Are we keeping the data in the data store, or are we keeping the data in the Rubrik cluster? If for some reason the data store gets out of alignment as part of these, then the worst impact that these blueprints and their misalignment might have on the recovery is a potential elongation of that recovery time, because we'll have to copy that data back out to the data store if that seeded hydrated copy is no longer there. All right, now let's go through the blueprint creation process. So real quick, I'll give my blueprint a name, and then we will pick the Rubrik cluster in the primary site protecting the data. And then I'll note real quick here that local in-place recovery is actually a first-class citizen in AppFlows. So all blueprints that we create are enabled for local in-place recovery. So imagine if we had some dev test real estate that we were protecting with Rubrik, but maybe not replicating because it's not valuable to the business to keep that secondary copy in the DR site. In that case, we can create blueprints without failover enabled and use AppFlows for those local in-place recoveries to cover our backs in the event of breaking changes, for example. Imagine going into a breaking change that would lead you to have to rebuild the entirety of the environment, and that would take you many hours. So instead, capture an on-demand snapshot of all the VMs within the blueprint, run that change. If it goes well, great. If it doesn't, no problem. Call the AppFlows job to go ahead and do that in-place recovery and revert back to that point in time before you introduce the change. So really kind of a nice technology there for local recoveries. All right, now I'm going to pick that target cluster after turning on remote failover because we do want to see what it looks like to set up a DR blueprint. And then I'll start searching for my VMs by name. I know mine contain L1. I'm going to pick an app server, a database server, and a web server. And we can see each has a unique SLA assignment based upon its role within the app and the importance of the data to the business. And that'll dictate how frequently we back up and replicate that data set and which recovery points in time will be available to us for these disaster recovery events. All right, now we're into boot order priority. If I had 5 or more VMs, I would see up to 5 of these boot order priorities, and I could stack and stagger these VMs in any order that makes sense. For me here, obviously data, app, and then web makes the most sense, so I'll select that now. What we're basically going to do is we're going to boot these VMs in the first boot order priority. We're going to configure networking. We're going to run post scripts, and then we're going to move on to the next boot order priority. So when we do, though, we actually create environment variables about the network configurations that we've carried out here in the first, in the first priority, and we hand those off to the subsequent priority and do that snowball down the line. And what that allows you to do is use those environment variables in your post scripts for points of intelligence. Let's say, for example, you don't necessarily want to hard code that IP address that these systems may be taking on in the DR site into the post scripts. So instead, you can just leverage these environment variables. And then those scripts can have the intelligence needed to reconfigure the app stack, maybe update DNS, handle all those last mile configuration things that post scripts are accustomed to being used for. All right, now we'll get into the resource map portion of this. This is where we'll set the compute, storage, and networking mapping for these VMs to use in the DR site. Right away, you'll notice I am picking an individual ESX host. Not ideal, I know. Now, one of the benefits of us being on a SaaS platform with this offering is we can introduce new functionality, features, fixes, and I don't have to ask my customers to update anything in their data center. Instead, they'll just wake up on a Tuesday morning when we've updated our deployments in the cloud for the platform, and they'll enjoy the new feature. So in a handful of weeks here, we'll see DRS cluster support, resource pools, and folders become targetable objects for these compute maps. All right, clicking next, we get into that RTO optimization I've been talking a lot about. So we have the option to minimize that recovery time, get that copy staged in the data store, or be conservative. Keep that copy in the Rubrik cluster. Don't use that primary storage that's expensive sitting there in the DR site. Maybe it's being used for something else. And so this is the best option for the business. I'm going to go ahead and stick with this for the demo because, well, I create this blueprint many times a day and I often delete it. So, all right, now we're going to pick data stores. Kind of the same story here for data stores. We have data store clusters in the works right now. So in a few weeks, hopefully we'll see those data store cluster options available to us here as well. We can see the free space available. Again, we query that vCenter every 30 minutes. So we see, how big this VM is versus the free space. If you make a bad selection, it'll red you out, block you from clicking the next button. But I've done well here, so I'll just go ahead and move on. Now we get the post scripts. The only piece of advice I have for these is don't store the postscript on the VM. I learned that early on working with the product. Instead, put it in a version control system. Curl it off the box. Curl is available in most default installations of Windows and Linux, and you can use that to pull the script off of a web endpoint and then pipe it off to the execution engine per the operating system's needs. So PowerShell, Bash, whatever makes the most sense based on what's running there. All right, now we're getting into the network. This is where we're going to go ahead and configure those port group mappings for each network interface on each VM. So for me, I have my DR network defined for a real network, for a real failover. And I can do static or DHCP. I'm not going to bother with this right now. But here, I want to pick my isolation network. So I have a DR test isolation network that I've defined. And I'm going to point the VMs at that for when they do their test failovers so that I don't have that conflicting copy of the application environment up and running. All right, moving right along. Now we get to the last step. This is where we're going to pick that SLA domain I mentioned. So this is so we can continue backups on these VMs when they arrive in the DR site, and so we can replicate those net new backups somewhere else to subsequently protect them from additional site failures, possibly back to the primary site or potentially off to a tertiary location. All right, then I get a summary and I click create, and that's it. Now I have a blueprint. Now we are working on ways to templatize a lot of those options so that you can create a template and apply that early in the process, really short circuit a lot of the clickiness that you saw. We're also working on a capability to add what we call a DR plan into the product, where you can add multiple blueprints into a plan and execute a plan, including logical order of the failover of those blueprints. So imagine having a big master plan inclusive of all your blueprints, and then individual test plans that might include blueprints for sundry infrastructure or network services that are required for a given application that you can fail over along with it during those tests so that those things come online in the test bubble gracefully ahead of the app. And so it makes those test coordinations much simpler and easier to lay out in advance of those tests. So then you can maybe even schedule them and use that abort and cleanup option and then come back and take a look at those reports. So let's go now back to those jobs as they're probably finished, and they are. We can see both have finished. Let's take a quick peek at the WordPress app here, and we'll go to the Recoveries tab. And we can see this job took 7 minutes and 12 seconds. Not too bad. So we'll open that up. You can see all the steps and sub-steps. And all of these steps and sub-steps, their timestamps and the status, that's what goes into these compliance reports that we can download here with this cloud and down arrow link. So this is on a per job, per blueprint basis that we can see these reports. So we can hand these off to auditors. And as they're related to business services, they'll have a good sense for which environments are prepared and which environments are not. So let's go compare the time, 7 minutes, 12 seconds. And then we have this IE demo on here. And we see 6 minutes, 12 seconds. So a 1 minute shy because we didn't have to copy any data here. So it was a very consistent reflection of only the orchestration time necessary for this failover. And now we can go peek at the DR vCenter. And we can see, okay, there's those base images still. And there's my link clones. They're up and running. Excellent. And now here's the base images for the 2 WordPress VMs. And then here's the WordPress app server that's up in the new network, 172.21 this time. Go ahead and open that up. Take a quick peek. And ta-da, my AppFlows WordPress blog page is absolutely functional. So good deal. We've successfully failed over our application. And then when we're done and we're satisfied with our testing, we can come back and initiate the cleanup. So I'll check the boxes once more, click the ellipses, and say cleanup failover. Type a little comment in here, something for the auditor, something for leadership, maybe something snarky to see if my manager's reading my reports, and then click cleanup. And then in a few brief moments, it will take all of these virtual machines that we've created for this testing, including those base images for the WordPress app stack, and remove those from the system. It'll leave those incremental export demo VM images behind because those are set for that RTO optimization to minimize recovery time. All right. Well, I don't necessarily want to sit and wait for these to go, but they will go here very briefly. As soon as they start, I'm going to switch over and I'm going to give you a little sneak preview into that AppFlows and Radar integration that's coming later this month. All right, let's see. These should be going here any second now. And they're on their way. Come on. Of course, it's going to take longer because we're on a demo and I'm waiting. Normally they go faster than I can even get to the tab, but here we are. All right, we can come back for it. So let's go take a quick peek. I want to take you out here to the Radar Anomalies page. So this is in a different Polaris environment. It's one of my dev environments because, again, this feature is still kind of in the holding. We're looking to release it in the next couple of weeks to our customers' production deployments. So here I am on the investigations page within our Radar dashboard. And what this allows me to see is blueprints that have suspicious activity. And so these are the ones where we think we've been struck by ransomware. And if I open these up, we can see the individual VMs that have had the impacts. And we can drill into these and see exactly which files and in which folders. Oh, no. Okay. I'm having a good day today with demos. Let me try that one more time on a different VM. Okay, good times. I'm going to go ahead and skip that then. All right, at any rate, we can see the snapshot time where we detected the behavior. So this gives us a cue or a hint in terms of which snapshots we need to use for the recovery. And so when we do check on these, if we pick the blueprint objects and hit recover, it's going to take us through the AppFlows workflow to recover these blueprints and their VMs in place. If I picked on just the individual VMs, let's say I pick this one and this one, that would take me through a different recovery called a bulk recovery, where I can select multiple VMs. And we'll basically take the same steps, but we won't have the orchestration capabilities of the blueprint. Instead, we'll immediately power them down, recover them in place, and then relaunch them. So you'll lack that nicety of the orchestration that blueprints offer if you don't do it that way. And again, this feature is coming very, very soon. So if you're shopping Rubrik or you're a current Rubrik customer and you have Radar and you're looking to introduce AppFlows in the environment for DR, the marriage of Radar and AppFlows is coming very, very soon. So you'll be able to take advantage of this capability here very soon. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. I think it's Q&A time. Oh, let's take a quick peek here at the DR. Ah, there they go. All cleaned up. See, I promise that cleanup function works. Good to go. All right. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen now. We can get right back to Q&A here.
All right, good stuff. Yeah, well, Joe, we've already heard from Jorge that this was a great demo, so I have to agree. A lot of features in there that to avoid
Awesome,
what I think you called a resume generating event. So I like that term. That's good.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also have to say I really
Definitely.
appreciate all the
Well, cool.
functionality there that makes testing as painless as possible. So you can do it regularly because the longer time between your recovery tests, the further your recovery, your testing plan is from reality. So it's really good stuff. So yeah, let's open it up to questions.
Awesome.
We've got quite a few rolling in here, and I'll actually ask you one before I get to some of the audience questions too. Does AppFlows support failover to the cloud?
Well, so right now we're in the version 1 of the product, we're supporting prem to prem, but we do have capabilities for failover to VMware Cloud on AWS as well as Azure VMware Service,
Okay,
coinciding with the release of CDM 602, which is our Rubrik cluster software, in the late November timeframe. So just at the end of next month. So we'll be able to support the use of those cloud-based software-defined data centers from VMware.
gotcha. Great.
Awesome.
So
Good
first question,
Yeah.
yeah, first question we've got here from Ned. We know that Rubrik supports leading operating systems, databases, hypervisors, clouds, and SaaS applications. How about legacy systems? Oh, sorry, the question just popped over to the next. As the questions are rolling in, it popped over onto my next screen. How about legacy
Oh no,
systems for backup? They're coming in fast and furious. How about legacy systems for backup and recovery needs?
I'm not terribly sure what you mean by legacy systems necessarily, but right now, yeah, we're focused on the VMware objects. We do have on our roadmap, we're exploring the opportunities for us to include some of our additional snappables, what we call our protected objects for things like SQL databases, Oracle databases, and any future snappables that we may have. So imagine being able to include individual database instances within these blueprints and recovering those selectively as part of that failover, maybe even to a different SQL server in the DR site. So stay tuned for some of those announcements coming eventually. I don't have a
Okay.
specific date for those, so just want to share that they are
All
definitely
right. Well,
thoughts in our minds.
gotcha. All right. You heard it here first. Um,
Cool.
this one from Steve. He's wondering if a site has been hit with ransomware, how do you make sure the backups are clean?
Great question. Great question. So really it's about the hardness of your backup platform, right? And it's your ability to determine that point in time at which you were attacked and your data was encrypted. Without some form of encryption detection, and I want to be really crisp here, encryption detection, not anomaly detection. Anomalous behavior can come in a lot of different forms. And a lot of the products in the marketplace today that claim ransomware capabilities around anomaly detection really are limited to that capability in general, right? And those anomalies can be things like a large amount of files being deleted and recreated, or lots of files being moved at once. but really it's important to differentiate what radar is able to do here in the product. And it's really able to detect encryption events, not just anomalous behavior. So being able to see and compare from one backup to the next, the types of data that we have in those backups, whether they were unencrypted or encrypted, and point those points in time out to you in an easy to understand fashion as radar is able to do, is really going to give you that capability to differentiate good from bad backups.
Gotcha. Super. Next question is from Ted, who's asking, how quick of an RTO can we see from disaster recovery in the cloud? And he's saying guaranteed time, that is. I saw an interesting acronym recently versus RTA or RTO, RTA, which is like real-time actual versus objective. But you know, I know that's a it depends kind of answer, but I don't know, any thoughts that provokes for you?
Yeah, I don't know that I can offer any like crisp empirical data to support a number, but I will say that like the capabilities that we have between prem and prem, we are bringing identically to prem to VMware in the cloud, and it'll basically use one of our Rubrik clusters running as a what we call cloud cluster. In fact, with the recent release of our 6.x CDM software, we now call it Cloud Cluster ES because it now uses elastic storage on the back end, meaning the
Hmm,
object storage in the cloud. So S3 and Blob on Azure. So the scale of those clusters from a storage and performance perspective can be independently managed. So now you can scale the number of nodes versus the capacity on the back end of those nodes and support any sort of aggressive movement of data that you need to meet those objectives. So I think there's a lot more flexibility in the platform now to meet some of those tighter timelines that customers have.
okay. This next question comes from Bradford, and I really like this question. And I'm really interested to hear what you have to say about this. What are the most common issues uncovered during DRAS testing? You know, what do you see?
Common issues, yeah. A
Yeah.
lot of times it comes down to it's going to come down to those postscripts more often than not, right?
Mm,
So
hmm.
sometimes sometimes you go to fail over these systems, and maybe I'm not starting in the right order, and so things don't come up correctly, or I'm missing a step in terms of reconfiguring part of the app stack to basically accommodate the changes in subnet that it may incur if you're not stretching your networks across those two locations. Um, other kind of messy stuff that might happen is in some of the other products in the marketplace, like I mentioned, a lot of these blueprint, ours is a blueprint, other companies call it something different. Those constructs actually dictate the movement of the data, whereas the blueprint does not. In some of those cases, if they're set incorrectly, those failover capabilities can be dramatically impacted to the point
Mm,
where the recovery becomes impossible. Maybe they're missing things. Um, One of the things that we've actually started talking about a lot internally is configuration drift, right? So these blueprints, you saw me create that blueprint by hand. Now you
hmm.
could programmatically create that blueprint through APIs. And one of the things that we talk about a lot is, these app environments, we deploy them, but they grow, right? The business grows, hopefully,
Hmm.
and those app environments grow with them. Maybe we have to add more front end servers, more app servers. As we do that, if we're not paying attention, we don't update our DR plans, we could be missing a whole set of systems when we go to run one of these failovers, and that could be very bad. So one of the things we'd like to be able to see is our customers, work with our customers to integrate their IT management workflows, things like maybe a ServiceNow workflow where that's the system you go through to deploy new web servers and new app servers. So inclusive in that workflow, it should also update the blueprint and include that new set of VMs to those business service blueprint definitions. So that's
Gotcha.
definitely a big one for us as well.
Configuration drift. That's a really
Cool.
good. That's a really good term for what goes on. I like that. Uh, Next question comes from Steve. He says, I have multiple locations, each with their own IT infrastructure and ERP. Would they each receive their own instance, and can they do restores, or is that a centralized function?
So Polaris is centralized in the cloud as a SaaS platform, but the way Polaris operates is you would have a Rubrik cluster in each of those locations, backing up the data that lives there. And then from a replication perspective, you would have to work out from which cluster to which cluster you'd like to make copies of that data to opposite locations, so that when you want to orchestrate that failover from the cloud down to those data center locations, you can do so through those command and control linkage between Polaris and the Rubrik clusters in those sites,
Okay,
or potentially in
gotcha.
the VMC or AVS instances come next November, or come November next month, right? So
Hey,
that's
another
cool.
question here. Will implementing the Rubrik solution reduce or increase our security attack surface?
Say that again one more time.
Yeah, will implementing the Rubrik solution reduce or increase our security attack surface?
Interesting question. So
Yeah,
I, I think it changes it. I would go so far as to say it changes it. I don't know about increase, certainly not increase. I mean, anytime you add a new service to a data center, you're increasing
sure.
the number of vectors to be attacked, right? So
Right, right.
introducing XYZ solution is going to open that solution to attack. But if you look at the way the Rubrik platform is designed in general, it was designed day one with a net new file system. And that file system by design is immutable, meaning you can't overwrite any object. We can't, you can't, no one can. It's programmatically impossible within the system. And it's an append only file system. So any new data written there is written to a new area on disk. It is only deleted or removed from the system by policy. And so those SLAs dictate the retention policy for the data sets captured there. And you can enable retention lock capabilities that literally say, I mean it when I say this SLA is going to keep this data for this amount of time, and no one is going to turn that capability off, not without a two-person agreement between, like a pair of security officers, for example. So that concept really kind of changes the equation for the attackers who typically go after these backups, right? Um, our
Hmm.
system is logically air gapped. The front end APIs, the front end APIs are not giving access to the back end APIs to those users interacting with them. So there's no way for you to get into the back end and manipulate the data from the front end. It's just impossible. And yeah, it's a whole nother ballgame with the way things are set up here and the zero trust platform. No node within a Rubrik cluster trusts another node implicitly. It verifies every node upon every communication using encryption methods to handle that communication. So it's a very safe way to store your data, which is what businesses are valuing the most in these technology landscapes. So pretty important stuff.
Excellent, excellent. Hey, well, it looks like we're running out of time, Joe, but is there any sort of, last thoughts that you want to leave the audience with?
Sure. If you're a Rubrik customer today and you're interested in what this product can do for your business, please don't be shy in reaching out to your account team. Um, they'll certainly engage my business counterpart Carl and I to show up and assist you through some of that process. But additionally, if you're not a Rubrik customer yet, I encourage you to go out to the website, read some of the case studies. I mentioned the Lang's building supply case study related to their ransomware attack and their ability to recover. So don't be shy. This is it's trying times. These ransomware attacks are just they're not funny, and they come hard when they come. And if you're not prepared, it can be devastating for your business. And really, Rubrik has made a significant effort to help businesses maintain their business data and be able to recover in the event of one of those attacks. So I encourage you to take a look.
Yeah, great points. Appreciate it. And I'm glad you mentioned that Lang's building supply example again, because those real world examples are so fascinating and instructive, to be able to look through and understand what happened to somebody. It's such a valuable thing when somebody's willing to talk about it and share their story. Well, great. Um,
Yeah, for sure.
yeah, and to that end, as far as getting more information, we've got that poll question up there about what additional information would you like about the Rubrik solution. So if you can go ahead and click on what you'd like to see next, we'll be sure to get that to you. And before we wrap up, we do have one more piece of business. It's the prize drawing. And the winner of the $300 Amazon gift card is Roland Co. from California. So congratulations to Roland. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, On behalf of the actual tech media team, I want to thank Rubrik for putting together a really informative presentation. And Joe, thanks for that presentation, the great demo, and all the insights in the Q&A. Really appreciate hearing from you today. And
Appreciate it.
I'd also like to
Thanks,
thank,
everyone.
yep, yeah. I'd also like to thank Rubrik for making this event possible. And last but not least, I'd like to thank all of you for attending and for all the great questions. You kept them rolling in, and that was great. So that concludes today's event. Have a great rest of your day.